Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to unpack how AT&T Network Systems used a brutally intense award-winning simulation to completely rewire its corporate culture. We're talking about the aftermath of one of the most historic market shifts in American business history. Before 1984, AT&T was an absolute behemoth. I mean, they literally were the telephone company. But when that monopoly shattered, the resulting shockwaves meant that high-stakes corporate survival was suddenly the name of the game. The company was faced with massive new financial responsibilities, and to adapt, they developed a training program so intense, so demanding, that it became legendary in the corporate world. We're going to explore exactly how they built it, how it worked, and why it was so incredibly effective. Section 1. Life after the monopoly. Surviving the Bell system breakup. Okay, let's dive right in with a surprisingly human look at corporate training. Picture this. You're going through a program so incredibly draining that you actually process the experience by writing poetry. We have this slightly exhausted, handwritten poem penned by a real participant of the course. You can feel the genuine charm, but also the sheer exhaustion in their words, writing that 8 days is long enough to spend our time on this stuff. But this charm really masks the massive corporate stakes behind NS 1251. This wasn't just some casual workshop. It was an 8-day training crucible designed to literally save AT&T in a newly deregulated market, forcing employees to adapt or risk total obsolescence. As this participant's humorous plea for rest highlights, literally begging the slave drivers to give them a break, the physical and mental stakes here were off the charts. People were staying up incredibly late, wrestling with really complex problems, and just feeling totally drained. But why exactly were these employees being pushed so hard that they were writing poetry to cope with the stress? Well, to understand the pressure cooker they were put in, we have to look at the massive tectonic shift that completely upended their entire industry. For decades prior to 1984, AT&T enjoyed total, unchallenged monopoly control. They were colloquially known as Ma Bell for a reason. They owned the infrastructure, the hardware, the customers, the whole shebang. But then, the U.S. Justice Department's modified final judgment actually broke them up. The legal hammer came down, and suddenly, AT&T Network Systems no longer automatically owned their primary customers. That guaranteed captive market vanished essentially overnight. They were plunged headfirst into the deep end of free market competition, where other companies were now actively fighting them for every single contract and every single dollar. And this wasn't just a structural change, it was a fundamental shift in psychology. It's your classic innovator's dilemma. Suddenly, these brilliant Bell Labs engineers had to completely ditch their century-old extend the technology monopoly mindset. For years, the vibe was simply to build the most amazing, durable technology possible, and it would automatically be deployed. Now, they had to transform into savvy business planners. They had to start making market-driven, bottom-line financial decisions. Building a great product just wasn't enough anymore. It had to be cost-effective, highly competitive, and profitable. Section 2. A new curriculum architecture. Building the product management blueprint. So, to survive this dramatic sea change, AT&T needed a massive upskilling effort. They couldn't just tell their employees to think differently, they had to rewire their actual skill sets. They built a performance-based curriculum architecture design. Take a look at this incredibly detailed 3D functional model. It portrays the complex interactions of a massive new 108-module curriculum. The goal here was highly strategic: teach required skills directly tied to business outcomes, stress real-world on-the-job performance, minimize the time employees had to spend away from their actual work, and ensure everything learned was immediately transferable back to the harsh new reality of the open market. The target audience for the centerpiece of this massive curriculum, the specific NS 1251 course we're exploring, was 800 product planners. And these weren't just any planners. They were managing multi-billion-dollar product lines for AT&T Network Systems. We are talking about the highly expensive switching systems and physical telecommunications infrastructure that literally powered the country. This meant every single decision these 800 individuals made or failed to make had absolutely massive financial implications for the entire corporation. There was no margin for error. They needed to get this training right. Section 3. The 8-day crucible. Role-playing corporate survival. The solution to bridging this massive knowledge gap wasn't going to be found in dry corporate lectures. PowerPoint slides and thick binders of business theory just weren't going to cut it. Instead, they created an intense 8-day simulation centered around a tangible, high-pressure game board focused on highly realistic, albeit fictional, video products. 20 participants at a time would gather around this board, physically moving pieces and tracking data, totally immersing themselves in the tactile reality of managing a product's entire life cycle. It turned abstract financial concepts into a highly competitive, immediate reality. Over the course of the simulation, participants were paired up to lead cross-functional product teams through 5 grueling phases of a product's life cycle. They had to navigate all the way from the initial concept phase, through justification, realization, growth, and eventually decline and discontinuance. But here's the real twist. They sequentially swapped roles. One round you might be the product manager, the next you're playing the Bell Labs developer, then manufacturing, then sales. Imagine the difficulty of having to passionately argue for the manufacturing department's budget when your actual, real-world job is in marketing. You had to genuinely sit in the shoes of your counterpart organizations and voice their concerns. And it was definitely not designed to be a clean, predictable exercise. The facilitators intentionally injected real-world political garbage into the simulation to mirror the absolute messiness of corporate life. Teams were hit with unpredictable instructions that completely derailed their plans. They'd receive sudden voicemail updates that fundamentally changed their scenario midstream. They even had to roll dice to draw disruptive breaks cards that altered their hard data right in the middle of a critical meeting. All of this had to be managed while constantly navigating conflicting cross-functional agendas between the different departments they were role-playing. And right in the middle of all this induced chaos, the role-playing and the sudden scenario changes, they still had to crunch real, complex numbers. Teams were given exceptionally tight 2-hour windows to complete rigorous income statements and cash flow financial forecasts. They had to formulate full business cases and operational plans while the clock was ticking. It forced them to tie every single strategic decision, every compromise they made with another department, directly back to the ultimate bottom line. Section 4. Staggering returns on investment. Validating the game with hard data. Let's look at the results because this builds into an absolutely undeniable success story. The outcome was nothing short of spectacular. The client reported an astounding return on investment of over 400%. Now, proving ROI on corporate training is notoriously difficult, but this wasn't fuzzy math. This 400% figure held up even after the course creators rigorously accounted for every conceivable cost in the calculation: travel, hotel stays, materials, and most importantly, the lost wages of having 800 highly paid professionals off the job for 8 full days. It was so effective, it actually won an International Society for Performance Improvement Award of Excellence. The hard data from the post-training evaluations completely backed this up. Participants themselves reported feeling their effectiveness on the job increased by an incredible 51%. But perhaps even more importantly, their supervisors, the people actually evaluating their day-to-day work and making sure the business was functioning, reported a solid 34% boost in on-the-job performance. That supervisor data is really the gold standard for training validation, proving that the skills learned in the game board simulation were translating directly to the real world. You don't just have to take my word for it. The original feedback forms actually bridge the gap between what looked like a chaotic, gamified exercise and concrete, measurable corporate outcomes. These meticulously tracked evaluations proved that when you force employees to grapple with the actual pressures of a business cycle, the resulting performance increase is both tangible and highly valuable to the broader organization. Immersive practice actually works. As one internal review memo noted perfectly, the true hidden strength of the course was the students themselves. By forcing participants to add their own unique, on-the-ground experiences to the business simulations, it created this highly dynamic, real-life atmosphere. This wasn't just about memorizing financial terms or learning how to fill out a cash flow statement. It organically instilled the critical importance of team leadership, cross-departmental empathy, and real-time conflict resolution. So the crucial takeaway from AT&T's journey with NS125 is the undeniable power of immersive, performance-based training. When the world shifts beneath your feet, whether that's from deregulation in the 1980s or the massive technological and AI shifts we're seeing today, traditional lectures just don't cut it. You literally have to rewire the way people think and react under pressure, leaving us with a really provocative question for you to consider. How could your organization use high-stakes, experiential simulations to successfully navigate its next big market shift? Think about it. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.